Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here for this panel. My name is Kestrel. I host and produce a podcast called Conscious Chatter that's dedicated to the conversation around fashion and sustainability. This panel is all about the concept of rethinking merch. So we are going to talk about why we need to rethink merch. What does that even matter? And then we're also going to get into lots of different solutions that these amazing panelists are working on. So I will introduce our panel for you. We have down on the end Samantha Pattinson, a storyteller and the CEO of Black Pearl, an organization at the forefront of cultural sustainability across fashion, music, and entertainment. We have Jillian Clark, who is the founder of Roboro, a creative reuse and sustainability agency. We have Heather Quintana, who is a music merchandise veteran and the senior director of brand management at Bravado, a division of Universal Music Group. And we have Marcy Zaroff here, the founder and CEO of Eco Fashion Corp, a tech-enabled, fully integrated end-to-end supply chain platform for apparel and home textiles, and the author of Eco Renaissance. So, thank you all for being here. I'm really stoked for this conversation. I heard some people at lunch saying that they were excited also for this conversation, so I hope we can provide some powerful and valuable insights for you. So before we dive into solutions, like I mentioned, I want to kind of like contextualize why this even matters. So when we think about merchandise, it's very much a part of the music industry, very much a part of the entertainment space. So I'm curious first, I'm thinking, Samantha, with your experience in the fashion industry and supply chains, can you help contextualize why rethinking merchandise even matters? Like when you think about it from a human impact, a sustainability, the environment, waste, these sorts of layers, why do we need to think differently?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. Lovely to be with you. To answer that question, I think thinking about merchandise as something impactful to me is, if you consider what merchandise is, I mean, from the apparel perspective, it is a touch point and a way that artists communicate with their fans, with their communities. So it's extremely kind of powerful and tangible way for them to do that. Aside from that, it's extremely impactful because of its revenue generating potential. It's an incredibly profitable stream for artists. I mean, any given tour can bring in 200 million plus from just the merchandise. So the fact that it can bring in that volume gives you an idea of how impactful it is. But, you know, my background is coming from fashion. So I was a self-taught designer who studied economics, finance, and management. But for a big part of my career, I was leading sustainable fashion campaign at the Oscars. And so I've been studying fashion's impact on environment and people for such a long time. And the merchandising pathway is pretty much similar to the fashion pathway in that we're reliant on the same inputs. We're reliant on the same natural resources, and we work across the same global value cycle. So when you take that into consideration, the same considerations the fashion industry has been grappling with are now coming into conversations around merchandise. For example, things like, how are we producing this? What textiles are we using? How are we dyeing this? How are we reducing our waste? Who is involved in making these things? And how are we ensuring that we have transparency on how they're being made? These are conversations that have been happening in the sustainable fashion space for such a long time. And you can see the relationship they have between what's happening in the apparel and merchandising space as well. I think the reason it's important to rethink it is not because we're doing anything new, so to speak. T-shirts and hoodies are not new. You know, T-shirts have been around since the early 20th century. You know, they're a long stay. And neither some of the solutions we're talking about either, like regenerative agriculture is centuries old. But the reason we really need to rethink it is because of all the cultural shifts that are happening as we live and breathe. A couple of examples of which being things like strikes, tariffs, shifting cultural centers of production. Because of all of these things affecting the very resources we depend on and affecting the very people who are making their merchandise and apparel for us, we have to have just a redefined strategy about how we interact with and how we approach making merchandise for artists and for their communities as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Samantha, contextualizing it for us. You mentioned kind of the importance of how, you know, musicians are saying something to the world when they're connecting with audience. Like, I was talking to Marcy earlier about this. It's like, when you're an artist, you want to reach people on an emotional level. So it's important. It's not just like this small afterthought. It's not like yes, making money is a part of the business, but it's not the only thought, because you want to connect on this deeper level. And I think that innately lends itself to this idea of intentional design, and that being a part of what's behind merchandise. So I think I'd love to kind of explore a bit of that in the way intentional design and storytelling intersect with culture. Jillian, I know you've been working on some cool projects around this. Do you want to kind of touch on that overlap and how powerful that can be to kind of elevate artists to a new level?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much. So this past year, I've been working with Chapel Roan and helping her transfer all of her existing merch to be more sustainable options. And one of her big priorities was to really enhance her fans' experience. She didn't want to just be asking her fans for something, buy my merch. She wanted to be providing them with something, whether it be a service, an experience, an emotional connection to her products. And she also didn't want to be just putting more brand fill out into the world, more junk out into the world. And so we looked at it from a couple different angles. The first product that I worked with her on was her Midwest Princess trucker hat, camo hat with the orange stitching. It was originally 100% polyester. We switched her over. We resourced a 50% cotton, 50% polyester. Still not perfect, but a small step, and what her existing supply chain could keep up with in the quantities that we needed. And then that hat later went on to inspire the Harris Waltz presidential campaign hat. So that was, I was telling Gestra earlier, the day I saw that announced, I was like crying, calling a friend. I was like, this is wild, the kind of impact that an artist can have. And then that hat is a reflection of her values, switching, resourcing that. That was a really amazing example of how those small changes can impact more than even just the fans. It can impact culture, it can impact society, it impacts history.
Yeah, I know when Samantha was talking about culture earlier, Heather, you were nodding your head a lot. Do you want to kind of touch on that cultural component too, and how important
Sure.
that is to intersect with storytelling? And
Of course, yes. So part of my job at Bravado is not only overseeing our roster of artists, which is under Universal Music Group, but I also am Billie Eilish's brand manager. So I eat, breathe, sleep Billie Eilish merchandise. And we went on a very long, sustainable journey to get where we are today. And it started out small by, we're going to print on organic t-shirts. We're going to print on, something that is easy to find in the marketplace and, can be sourced relatively painlessly. But then we said, you know what? We're doing this on such a big scale. We can do this better. We just have to plan for it. And this was something that an earlier panel touched on. As long as we know that Billie Eilish is always going to make t-shirts, let's throw down. And let's make a blank for her that is bespoke to her, her cut, the fabric she wants, and let's, go big on ordering the fabric. So we ended up going with 100% recycled for her merchandise on tour. And believe me, the scale of that is huge. But the fans, although they do believe, in her mission and her wanting to support these causes, are happy to wear this product because it's a nice piece of merchandise. It doesn't have that granola feeling to it that you might associate with something that has sustainable features. We've really come up with a quality product, and I feel like it's making a big difference when you go to arenas and, tens of thousands of girls are wearing merchandise that was made sustainably. And that's making a big impact. And, we're able to do that not only at tour, but we do it for retail. We do it for her e-commerce store. We do it everywhere that we go with Billie. And at Bravado, she was one of the pioneers to help us start thinking sustainably. But so many of our artists are demanding it now that it's really created a trend. We have collections coming out for the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Paramore. I mean, the list goes on. So it's just making that option available and putting it in the forefront of their mind so that it's an easy choice for them to make, to know that the offering is out there. And the more we do it, the pricing will go down and it'll become a much more attainable thing for everybody in the future. So not only for Billy, but for Bravado, we've invested in, making our own blanks that anybody can use if they want to be sustainable. You just have to make the offer available.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the things we want to get into more with solutions. I want to touch on culture more, but I know it'll come up naturally later. And I see this clock just ticking so quickly. So a lot of times, you're thinking, okay, I'm working on merch, I want to change things. So you have, epiphany, you have a moment, you're like, okay, this is messed up, what's going on? I need to make changes. But then there's so many questions as to where do you even start? What questions do you ask? And so if, someone is in that position where they're just at that point of trying to figure out what to do next, maybe Marcy, you can help us get started with what are just some starting questions to kind of pique the interest and get you in a direction.
Hi. Okay. Hi, everyone. So just to set the stage to answer that, so I've spent the last 30 years pioneering sustainable fashion, building supply chains from raw materials up, being on teams that wrote a lot of the certifications that are out there to ensure traceability and transparency and authenticity of product. And just building off of what Heather said, so when I got introduced into Universal Music Group and Bravado, it was, can we make sustainable merch at scale? And so my company, Eco Fashion Corp, partnered with Bravado and started really at that fiber level. And so the first question I would say is, where's the fiber coming from? Because it's pretty easy for anyone out there. There's not a lot of policy, unfortunately, in our industry. It's coming, and that is lighting a fire under a lot of companies right now, both at the mass market level, and we say from mass to class. Everybody's waking up and starting to talk the talk. But with that comes, risk for companies. So when if you're, looking at buying merch, you want to know what's the source of the products, how do they back that up, what are the certifications and or verification systems that validate that what you are going to ultimately be saying is actually real. Because, whether, you're saying the word recycled or even organic and regenerative, while organic food is federally regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, organic fiber isn't. And they've embraced it from the standpoint of what's called the GOTS certification, or the Organic Content Standard is another certification. But there's a lot of companies out there, unfortunately, that throw it out there because they made a call in their supply chain somewhere and somebody told them that it was organic or regenerative or even recycled, and they just believe it, right? Without checking, going deeper. So the first thing is know where the fiber came from, know how the product was being made, because you don't want to find out after you've made it using, quote, sustainable fiber, that then it's made unethically or in some, sweatshop somewhere to get that price down. So there's so many variables. I don't know if you know this. A t-shirt, a garment can change hands sometimes 10 times in a supply chain from fiber up, right? So you have fiber, if it's cotton, it's gin, then you have spinning, you have knitting or weaving, then you have cutting, sewing, dyeing, printing, packaging, all of these layers, and many of those layers are often outsourced in our industry. So you want to know who's making it, where it's being made, what's in it, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to look for what we call preferred fibers and materials. So there's an organization that I was a part of co-founding that's called the Textile Exchange. And we have about 1,000 members, all the big retailers, brands, and also a lot of supply chain partners, fiber partners, farmers. And overall, the industry is making a commitment now to reduce our carbon footprint by 45% by 2030. And so, again, there's a lot of talk out there, but at the end of the day, if you really want to scale sustainable merch. And it's so important because artists are cultural catalysts. And just building off, for a minute, the first question is, fans today, super fans, I mean, they're us. They're our kids, they're, our communities. And the truth is that everybody is out there today seeking purpose, looking for, solutions. As Albert Einstein once said, we can't solve today's problems with the same consciousness that created them. And these younger generations who are predominantly, the merch buyers, right, at these shows, for the most part, they're waking up where, climate change is in their face every day. I mean, I was landing in LA yesterday and I got an Amber Alert that there was an earthquake, while I was landing, and it's scary out there. And I think, to spin this into, it's positive. And so when you ask those questions about the who and the what and the where and the when and the why, that story needs to be authentic, right? Because, for them to believe this and know that this isn't just a marketing proposition, this is actually making real change happen in the supply chains for farmers, for factories, for workers. And so in order to not just do less harm, but do more good, we have to know how to ask these questions and what to look for. And as a consumer, reading labels and, looking for certifications and looking for, the source of who and where those products are being made is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Not only, not only from the manufacturing side, if you're making something, you need to be asking these questions, but also we all have a role in this to play, asking more questions, sharing it with our friends, getting more knowledge about the reality behind our clothes. I want to get into solutions because there's so many that all of you are working on that I feel like are really exciting and very diverse. To start with, building off of when you're just getting into this, the simple questions that you want to ask, I think the easy swaps sometimes are a nice place to start for people. And so whether you are, a smaller label or independent artist, or you are, more of a massive sort of artist, what are those simple things you can switch right away? Heather, I know you have thoughts on this.
Yes, I do have thoughts on this. So, it's all come a long way, and there are off-the-shelf things available pretty easily. But I will say that you want to be top of the mountain, you're doing recycled organic. Then you could switch to 100% recycled. Then you go to organic cotton. And, there are even entry-level things like BCI cotton. While not perfect, they're better than the alternative. And, I will say that we are very conscious when we design things now to use water-based inks rather than plastisols. Not only is it good for, you wearing the garment, but it's good for the afterlife of the garment, that it can be recycled and, turned into something else. So that's something that we've been playing around with, which is upcycling. Like this bag is a good example of that. We worked with Rewilder to do it. And, that's 2 Billie Eilish tour shirts that we turned inside out, overdyed, and printed on. And now it's a new garment that's going to have another life. And, it's because we made those choices in design when we were making the garment that it can have a life, after the user is done with it.
Yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit about fiber there for a minute, and you're, of course, kind of alluding to that. When you think about the fashion industry or the textile industry, over 60% of the fiber that's produced globally is made from synthetic material. It's basically fossil fuel derived. And I think that's a kind of massive thing that a lot of us don't realize. We think, oh, cotton is the fabric of our lives. We hear that all the time. It's been ingrained in us. But actually, plastic is the fabric of our lives. So it's really important to kind of think about that, to contextualize. And so I guess when we think about more sustainable fibers, Samantha, do you want to add some other ideas as far as that goes?
Yeah, sure. And I also want to redirect this definition of sustainability slightly and expand on it, because I think my background was actually starting with the materials. So I used to think, when I'm looking at sustainable design processes, there was this kind of chronological way I had to approach it, that, okay, first I have to consider materials. Then I have to consider those things, when actually it's something you consider all together in a line at the same time. So this idea that there are these alternative materials, great. I mean, there's a whole host of them. There's anything from, there's regenerative hemp, there's banana fibers, there's bio-based fibers, there's mycelium. There's literally a Rolodex of materials right now, and new ones are constantly being innovated. I think what we have to really be careful of is recognizing the exact same conversations that need to be happening at the same time. So when I speak to like the materials, yes. When I speak to the dyes and the chemistry, equally as important at the same time. When we speak to the processes, when it's cutting, making, and trimming, whether that's zero waste or seeing the facilities within which that stuff is happening as being safe for people to work in, as being completely void of child labor, as being spaces where women have the same opportunity as men to kind of scale the career ladder. Like, these are also expressions of sustainability, because you could go to the end of a product and say, here we have this incredible like recycled cotton t-shirt, but without those other pieces, then that word sustainable kind of becomes devoid of its true meaning. And I think that's part of what Black Pearl's always been trying to do, just push that understanding of what is a sustainable product. Can everyone get into this product? Is there size inclusivity? Can the disabled community wear this hoodie? You know, are we using magnetic closures or Velcro? Like, there are things that you discover when you're in the design process that enable you to include more people in the solutions. Like, we're working on a campaign, and the merchandise for that campaign, we just decided, like, we're not doing kangaroo pockets, we're just not doing it. Because having done some market research with members of different kind of communities, specifically the disabled community, they'd said, it's just too hard for us. Like, with this limited mobility, or with this, it's harder for us to get into pockets this way than it is to get in them that way. And these are just small ways we challenge through cultural perspectives that what is design and what is sustainable design. I just also wanted to tag on to the previous question around kind of intentional design. I think we're moving away from this space of what used to be considered old luxury and what's becoming new luxury. Old luxury was something as a status symbol, and it's as simple as that. So having the thing is enough. New luxury, and where we're looking at now, is this idea of it's not just about having something, it's about a sense of belonging, it's a relationship, and it's a story. So when we talk about storytelling around the items we're making, our passion is really doing that really authentically. One of the projects we work on is also with Billie Eilish, a project founded by Maggie Bed and Billie Eilish called Overheated. And it's a festival that she does, and we're the sustainable fashion partner for that. So what we did last time is we had fans bring in old merch, old t-shirts, etc. And then we had a customization station where they could pick things, like pick a dead stock patch, pick this, pick that. And we taught them, and we watched them observe something being made. And we showed them, this is actually the process. This is how things become something that you then wear. So there are also moments of education where you're empowering people to not only wear the thing, but to understand what they're wearing, to care to look into the label, to care to be a bit more inquisitive. And I think that's probably one of the things we feel most passionately about. And just the last thing I'll say on the fiber piece, which I think is something to consider as well, one of our roles as a cultural sustainability organization is we're building out a cultural textile database. So what we're doing is we're exploring the textile and apparel solutions that are inherent across the globe. So if you're in Accra, or if you're in Lagos, or if you're in Calcutta, or if you're in wherever it is, or in Tokyo, what are those local textile solutions? What do they look like, whether it's the textiles or the dyes? And when we're then looking to source and create bespoke merchandise capsule collections for this artist from Lagos, how can we embed the cultural resonance for that artist, something that's significant to them, in what they're then offering their fans? So I think we try to look at it from kind of an outside-in perspective, and think, how can we do something that's a little bit different, but brings the values of that artist to the merchandise, so it becomes like more of a cohesive message.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And just like, thank you, Samantha. Yeah, the intentionality of that, I think, is something that just resonates when you're trying to tell a story. It made me think about, on the other side of things, the reality that a lot of people who are fans have an expectation of paying not super high prices for merch. So this is kind of like taking it on the other side, but I think an important piece of the puzzle is like, if we have this cost element that we have to think about, how do you balance cost, expectations of the fan, human impact, environmental impact, waste, all these things. Like, how do we balance those different layers when a fan may have a particular expectation?
I can answer that. So it is a challenge, the pricing, I can't lie. To produce a shirt with fair labor and good materials and print in the correct way and dye in the correct way, it's not cheap. But we order on such a scale, and as I said earlier, we throw down and buy the fabric and have it sitting waiting to be dyed to the color we want. We don't have all the sweatshirts cut, but we invested in the material. So we're able to turn it relatively quick based on making that investment. And at a concert for Billie Eilish, we charge $50 for a t-shirt, maybe $125 for a sweatshirt. But if you go to any other concert, you're paying that price for something that may not be sustainably made. And and the person is walking away with an item that is actually a very quality item that they will cherish forever. And I really truly feel like I'm making a memorabilia that people hang on to in the long term. But Marcy can speak to this. We know Billie Eilish has fans of all economics. And so, when Target wanted to buy Billie Eilish's merchandise around the Hit Me Hard and Soft record, we had to come up with something at a price point that would work for Target, would work for the customer, would still be Billie Eilish's feel, fit, fabric. And so Marcy and I helped develop, blanks for retail, and it had not been done before. Target paid a little bit more for it. The fan paid maybe $1 or $2 more for it, but we can make it happen on all different levels.
Yeah, so super exciting co-creation, and it just shows the power of collaboration. Everyone talks about collaboration. 1 + 1 = 11, right? We're exponentially stronger together than we are apart. And so when Bravado and I connected, and this opportunity came to life, it's probably been one of the most exciting in my whole career partnerships I've ever had, because recognizing that everybody will win, right? We start at the fiber level, and I know we touched on that, and 70% of social and environmental impacts in the fashion and textile industry are happening at that fiber and material level. So we start and we build from the ground up, and by doing so, we knock out a lot of the excess, the agents and brokers in the middle that are selling cotton or selling yarn or selling fabric or selling, and we unlock all those inefficiencies so that we can, at the end of the day, have a finished product that's full package, that's embedded in the DNA of the product, that all the social and environmental progress and mitigating impact, looking through the lens of climate action at every single step of the supply chain from fiber up, and then ultimately delivering a product that is no compromise on style, quality, fit, color, comfort, hand, and price. And therefore unlocking that stigma that Heather mentioned of, sustainable apparel has to be crunchy or frumpy or boxy or beige or boring or, just overpriced. Or so to add $1 at retail at Target, where, again, you unlock many, many more people, and it becomes a positive cycle where that scale, that volume can keep driving the price down so we can get closer and closer. And, a couple of the panels earlier today touched on both a challenge and an opportunity. One of the challenges is planning, right? And we've learned this in working with Bravado, that I would ask artists and music management companies to really listen to this planning conversation, because if we can get ahead of planning properly, and it's not, Billie's been an incredible force, and Maggie, and I would just say that this should be for all artists. This should be a mandate, not a choice. This should be an imperative, because it's not why would you buy sustainable merch? It's why wouldn't you? And it really often does come down to that you feel like there's sacrifice or deprivation. You're giving something up. But if it's done in partnership, at scale, with everybody at the table, where everybody can win, including the super fan, and especially the artist, loyalty, brand image, all of that comes with it, then it's about really looking at how can we take merch and make it a force for good, and not just this, it's made in China, it's, conventional cotton. And I'll just end with saying, because I know you touched on it, Kestrel, is about cotton. We've all been told, cotton is a natural, right? It's like the milk is a natural thing. It's marketing campaigns. But if you pull the curtain back and you really unveil the human and environmental impacts of conventional cotton, they're astronomical, right? And so we really have to look through the lens of, moving away from virgin synthetics, moving away from conventional cotton, and really supporting fibers, again, that 70% statistic is real, that are, going to be a part of, where we can wear the change that we all wish to see. And when we talk about regenerative and organic cotton, the reason it's relevant is not because, it's just, again, some word we're dropping on. It's about building soil health. And soil health is, a reflection of human health. Right? Soil is the skin of the earth, and it's meant to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's meant when there's biodiversity and it's a living, breathing ecosystem, right? Because cotton comes from nature, right? We forget this. We think our clothing grows in the department store, and we forget that it starts in nature. And so if we want to support, biodiversity and our children's futures, we have to be looking, again, at the source of our products, a metaphor for the source of who we are, that we have to turn the light on, and we have to go back to, what we know to be true, which is, at the end of the day, the seed is life, right? And we want to bring that energy up our whole supply chain and let people feel the change. So when fans or super fans, artists are excited about, being able to have that choice, that option, it's on so many levels. We hear look, feel, do good in the world, but it's also from we can all be a part of something together, right? And it is going to take that because no one person, company, or garment is going to make this change happen.
Did you have something, Samada?
Yeah, sorry. Oh. It's just my language so much, sorry. I had a very actual kind of, semi-emotional kind of wave when you were talking about the biodiversity piece. And I'm so glad you said it the way that you did, because this is such a nice company to be in, because often that connection between what people are putting on their bodies and where it comes from is so distant, because it's not something that's taught in schools. And I've said this before, which is why with Black Pearl, one of our really big pillars is educational programming and curricula. Because much in the same way that most people know how to make a salad, or they go to the supermarket and they know how to judge if a fruit is good or not, we have such a disconnect now between seeing how things are made and understanding how things are made and where they come from. And even that notion that our clothes comes from farms and fields and forests. And when you say that, people are like, what do you mean farms? I'm like, leather, it's an animal skin. Oh yeah, So we have to kind of keep reiterating that. And on the biodiversity piece, one of the things that we've been really working on with the sustainable design solutions piece and around the merchandising is not just this kind of thing I mentioned before around these cultural databases, because as so many of you have said, we're drawing from all over the planet for what we need. We're touching Vietnam, Thailand, Pakistan, Italy. There's not a country in a way that we don't touch in some way to make this stuff. But there's also this tool that we're working on with an academic institution where we're basically monitoring the biodiversity impact of what is being extracted. So for example, if someone is relying on cotton or silk from XYZ country, then we have this kind of, much like you watch the stock market and you see how this announcement will influence that, we're kind of building a tool where you can do the same thing, where you can watch how this consistent series of droughts or floods or whatever it is, how will this affect this region that's producing this specific thing? And what reliance do we have on that specific form of biodiversity? How much cotton is harvested from that area? How prone is that to risk? And how will that disrupt our clients' value cycles? So I just love the placement of the word biodiversity in this conversation, because I think it's critical. And I like the idea of what are the tools that we can use to kind of get ahead of some of these things so you're not in the back foot. I remember end of 2023, we were consulting with an artist around their merchandise, and we were able to stop them going into production in an area that maybe 2 months later was hit by the most insane series of factory shutdowns and strikes, because we knew it was coming, because we'd been monitoring the conversation, and we were able to avoid having that production delayed and all of the things that come with that just by contingency planning. And that's where, Kestrel, you ask about this culture conversation. that culture isn't just this kind of belief system and ways of living. It's actually analyzing the human profile of a place, not just the biodiversity profile of what you're taking from that place, but the human sentiment around that place. Is there political unrest? Are people striking? Are there droughts? Are people migrating? And then translating that into information that will help you kind of future-proof your merchandise and your value cycle. So I love the biodiversity piece, and I just wanted to kind of add that on.
It's such an important point, and I feel like during COVID times, early COVID times, we had so much more of an awakening of the realities of supply chains and how much they impact our lives. And now I believe right now we are amidst another awakening with the reality of these tariffs and what impact that's going to have on, production, which, we talk about manufacturing in the US and great, all for that in certain levels, but was talking to Jillian earlier, the US doesn't have the infrastructure that these other parts of the world have developed over years and years and years. So we're not gonna be able to snap our fingers and suddenly make all of these garments in our backyard, because literally, we are in the garment producing capital of the United States. Also, the sweatshop capital of the United States, to be clear about. Our time is ticking so quickly. I want to touch on one more thing quickly and then open it up for all of you if you have questions. We talked a lot about merch, and I feel like there's an assumption that merch is a t-shirt. It is this one iconic band t-shirt, which is definitely a piece of the puzzle, right? But I think it can be so much more in so many different interpretations. Like we talked about, it's storytelling. It's about this emotional connection. It's about representing this artist that you feel very connected to, that you want to be a part of this community. So curious if y'all can touch on just some other ways to reimagine what merch means.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So Robo's mission is to keep textile waste out of landfills and to think creatively, to come up with, creative problem solving. We can consider the fiber and the ink and the printing and all of that is absolutely crucial. And we have landfills filled with textile waste, and I was just at a breakout session before lunch, and they were talking about how waste is a resource. And part of, I kind of have a unique role in Chapel's world in that I'm not part of the distributor. Her distributor, Red Star, were kind of beholden to their vendors and their offerings, so they brought me in to kind of come up with some creative solutions. How can we keep her merch cute? How can we keep it affordable? And how can we make it sustainable? And when you are kind of beholden to certain vendors, there are only so many sustainable options. It doesn't, with supply chains, being interrupted, it doesn't necessarily mean you can hit the quantities that they need. So I was proposing different kind of outside-the-box solutions. And as I mentioned earlier, her real priority was her fans' experience. She wanted to provide them with an experience, with an emotional experience, something to take away from her shows that embodied her values. So I had proposed a circular merch table. So we have her custom, kind of traditional merch, and then could partner with a company like D-Brand that takes back their reverse logistics, they take back gently worn clothing. So that provides a service to her fans. They can come and bring clothing and donate it, but then we were also in talks with a company out of the UK called Beyond Retro, and they collect vintage clothing. They're kind of an institution in the UK, as I'm sure Samantha is aware. And we had talked about making her merch table in addition to her custom merch, secondhand clothing that her fans would wear to her concerts. When she was doing the festival circuit, each show was themed for one of her songs. There was a Kink is Karma night, there was a Pink Pony Club night, and the fans would come dressed in theme. And so if at her merch table, not only was it her merch from Red Star, but also this curated collection of secondhand clothing, because it gives more of that personal style, not just a Chapel Roan t-shirt, but it could be more of the concert gear. We had talked about having a screen printer set up, and people could bring their own garment and have it screen printed there. So there were all of these really unique ideas of how to keep it cute, how to keep it affordable, how to offer different items at different price points, and how to think outside the box of traditional merch.
I love that. There's so many more pieces to build on with that, but we're taking down time. I want to open it up. Does anyone have questions, thoughts that you would like to share?
Hi, so I'm wondering for those of us who aren't intrinsically involved in the fashion world, but have some part of the decision making or advising with artists or tours or other merch decision makers, what are the resources we can look towards for that? Because I find it somewhat confusing when you're talking about maybe a recycled PET shirt. Well, that's cool, it pulls plastic bottles out of the waste stream, but then it releases microplastics when you wash it. And so there's just, as you've mentioned, so many factors in the supply chain, the materials and that. What are the resources or ways that more of us in the room can help move this forward?
Well, so, I talked about before, challenges and opportunities. One of the biggest challenges, I'd say, that are connected, one is that we need more education, and that was talked about this morning. I think if this industry, if the music industry can create a toolkit that could be shared with artists so that they can influence, because I think there is definitely a disconnect there as to, there's a lot of information out there. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still learning new things every day, right? It's moving very quickly. And there's a lot to sort of navigate as it relates to, which one's better? Wait, I thought that was good. But two things. One is, I'll just touch on, for anyone who doesn't know this, every single synthetic in history essentially doesn't biodegrade and just creates, microfiber pollution. So a third of the plastic in the oceans is actually textile microfibers, right? So if you're eating fish, you might even be eating textile plastic microfibers, which obviously are endocrine disruptors, so there's a whole health component there, right? So to get educated, I mean, there are a variety of different coalitions and groups that are, put out information, whether it's Fashion Revolution or it's, the Textile Exchange. You can go on their website. There's a lot of information that's public information about different fibers. And as far as what's going on in this specific industry and where you can, vote with your dollars and actually, wear that change, I don't think it exists yet, and I think it's a great call to action for the space.
I'll add to that. Everything she just said, I would also say that how I go about it, and I kind of echo what was said earlier, that I feel like I'm constantly learning anyway. It's a constant journey. One of the first things we did, so I kind of stopped doing the Sustainable Fashion Project at the Oscars every single year, and now I'm the Sustainable Fashion Partner for the Academy with my new kind of entity, Black Pearl. But one of the first things we did was we created this resource called the Sustainable Style Guide for Everyone. And it is an extremely comprehensive, deep diving piece of literature that basically examines the concept of sustainable design. It examines everything from the materials, the dyes, the cultural influences, organizations, value-led sustainability, all of these different things. And in there we collected books, documentaries, podcasts, all of these organizations that you can follow, people that you can interact with, books you can read. There's just a host of information out there. So I would say check that out as just a jumping off point to go into other directions as well. And I think even being in this room and coming to speak to us afterwards, we can point you in directions, because the thing you said around the washing and the microfibers, there's a company that we were working with that has kind of developed a nano filter to capture this tiniest microfiber. So these innovations are happening, and they're partnering with washing machine companies and things like that. So there are really great things happening on the horizon, but it's hard to put all of that information or know where to go to get all of it at once. It just isn't consolidated, because like Marcy said, it's a constantly evolving space, and we're constantly discovering new solutions and then trying to translate those out. So just you being here as a start, for example, and the people in this room could probably help you as well on this journey.
I'm going to add one kind of almost shameless plug, but only because you asked the education question. But my book, Eco Renaissance, Co-Creating a Stylish, Sexy, and Sustainable World, actually connects the dots of art, food, wellness, beauty, fashion, and business what I call the spokes in the wheel of change. And if you understand organic, natural food, or food waste, or you're talking that language, it's almost taking a lot of the learnings from other sectors and applying it, because it really is a mindset that applies across all of these popular culture sectors, right? So just a resource that and I'll just say that the idea of design is the premise of the whole book. Renaissance, somebody talked about earlier, during the original Renaissance, that's when collaboration and consciousness and community and creativity and connection really were most prevalent, coming out of the Dark Ages and waking us all up. The original Renaissance, it was a rebirth of humanity, and that's what we need right now, is an eco-renaissance.
Can you speak to print on demand as a solution in e-commerce, and if that really is a solution for sustainability? Obviously, it sounds great, right? Because you have less waste, but I'm wondering about the model and if that's something that you're, like at Bravado, if you're encouraging your artists to do more of that, or is it problematic and we just don't know? Or?
So print on demand, I do understand the need for it because you're not creating printed garments that will go unused. So you are printing it to the needs of the customer. So there definitely is a benefit to not making too much or too little of something. So it is good from that perspective. Some artists are cool with it, but the quality of it is something that people may not feel is up to par with screen printing. But you know what? For most things, it's pretty okay.
I want to add to that. It's also the cost factor. That's a huge issue, right? So if you think of screen printing, being able to do thousands of units in a certain amount of time, the equivalent that a digital printer or an on-demand printer can do is in the hundreds. So you have a very a significant cost differential. And so the goal and hope is over time we'll make screen printing obsolete, because that is the ideal scenario, is to go direct to garment. It's just from a we're still driving innovation behind the scenes to make it happen. There's companies like Kornit, which is probably the largest on-demand printer in the world. Kornit, Kornit.
It's gotten so much better than it was,
Yeah.
truly. And it's nice to not make, more than you need.
And all their inks are certified organic, and actually, they make them themselves. And so from a standpoint of being eco-friendly, it goes even beyond the not using as much of the cost to produce something when you are producing digitally. It's efficient, super efficient, but it's also, a lot of the companies that are kind of driving these innovations in technology are also looking at the quality of the inks and the quality of the, energy being used, and so there's a lot of focus on that right now.
Hi. So the artists that you're referencing, Chappell Roan, Billie Eilish, are obviously really forward-thinking people who are really, leading the charge. But not all artists are necessarily woken up to the idea that this exists or that they should be doing it. Do you have any recommendations on how to kind of rattle people's consciousness a little bit and wake them up to being a part of this?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that just from having to essentially harangue artists for nearly 10 years to come and commit to making a sustainable statement of some sort, which was the project I was doing with the Oscars. And what I found to be the most successful way to have that conversation, it was to actually ask them a whole bunch of questions about what was important to them. Because I think it's very hard to get an artist aligned in a way that they'll speak about it with passion and be fully behind it if they don't care in some way. If there isn't some sort of an emotional connection or a value connection to what you're offering. So one example is I had a series of conversations with someone and we got to the bottom of the crux of what was important to them. And it was really around they were very much against chemicals, heavy chemical use, synthetics. They actually had a sensitivity with their skin. And they said, I'd love a solution that kind of speaks to that a little bit more. So we went on a whole deep dive around alternative dyes, non-toxic dyes, natural dye solutions. Another one we found that their passion was, one of the artists we're working on with right now is really trying to amplify Black entrepreneurship and Black enterprise, for example. So we're developing a collection with them, which is essentially every single supplier involved in the production of this merchandise is a black-owned business. And even the cotton is a black farmer who is like growing, harvesting, spinning, all of that himself and producing the cotton. So it was kind of like, I think if you tap into what the value and what's important to that particular artist, because there is something. If it's conservation, then we can talk about like microfibers in the ocean. If it's health and if it's non-toxic, then we can talk about the impact that harmful chemicals have on our bodies and on our biosphere. Everybody has a passion and interest in something. You just have to kind of find out what it is. And in some strange way, every single one of those interests and passions in some way links back to how we're making things. If it's human rights, how we're paying the workers, if it's where did it come from and transparency, they want to know that they can put their voice behind something that's not exploiting someone somewhere in a back room somewhere else. So I think it has to be a conversation of understanding that artist and what matters to them, and then finding a way to relate that to what you're then making to be essentially a signifier of who they are as well.
Thank you, Samata. We have like 25 seconds. Does anyone want to throw one more question out there for us?
If not, I can add one line to your question, which is how do you get more artists involved? So because of the success of the Bravado Billy program, we were asked to make 17 different styles across almost 40 or 50 different configurations of price, quality, weight, design, so that the collection that Bravado can show all their artists is just a beautiful, amazing collection at all different price points for all different purposes, tour, e-com, retail. So it's not like, oh, well, I have to be an environmentalist to, choose this. It's, let's just have, that's the selection going forward, us and other companies, so that the artist is choosing from something that they might not want to talk about. But at the end of the day, it's in the DNA of the product, right? And I think that is, where I think the vision of Bravado has been so powerful, and UMG, which is, let's make this something for everyone, right? Not just for the really passionate environmental artists, because eventually everybody needs to be at the table.
I had a quick question about the pricing of the t-shirts. So you mentioned that you made some for specialized for Target and then some for Tour. Is there a difference in the quality, or because what lets the price change?
Marcy, you can get into the specifics of the fibers, but slightly, I guess, is the right word. So to make it the pricing work for Target, it had to be a little bit less of a heavy cotton, organic cotton. And at Tour, we're doing 100% recycled. So that is like very hard to source and not something that Target would have really been able to do at a price point. So it's just a little nuance to it, I guess. But I wouldn't say one is, is inferior to the other by any means. They're just different.
Yeah, the two components when you're looking at a mass market retailer are price and scalability, right? So even if 100% recycled, was an option, is it scalable at the level that you need it to be able to sell to a Target or a Walmart we did for Billy's t-shirts 80% certified organic, 20% certified recycled cotton. And, again, the differential between the same exact product that we might make for Tour or e-com, it might be a heavier weight. It might have more detail in the design. So there are certain things you, for lack of a better word, simplify or, dummy down, right, to get it to be cost effective at retail. So but these are all things that are all doable. There's no limitation, right? It's just a matter of vision and commitment and collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you for your insight.